come and resin with me, and today it's gonna be some skulls. So I've got lots and lots of ideas for some skulls, and I do apologise for my absolute rubbish filming. So using this lovely heat box that I created the other day, as you can see, got it right up, temperature to the max, just to get it nice and warm while I'm working. Got to get the gloves on. Okay, if you've never suffered with contact dermatitis, you're very, very lucky. If you resin and you haven't suffered with contact dermatitis from the resin, let's keep going with the gloves. So I've got some brand new resin here. It is the J. Diction deep pore resin, so it's 2:1, so it's 2 parts A to 1 part B. I always get quite confused if it's anything else, so the 2:1 is the best option if you're not very number oriented like me. So it's brand new, not even been opened yet. And the same with the skull molds. Now I love these wipes. They are amazing. They're the best wipes ever. If you've spilt mica powder or even glitter, I mean, how many people have spilt glitter somewhere and thought, that's it, I have to set my house on fire, claim on insurance and move because the glitter will never leave. These are the wipes that will save you, I promise. And also they have a really nice scent to them and they don't really destroy your skin either. So measuring out the resin really, really carefully. So I always do part A first and part B in the same container. So I know some people will mix part A and part B. Well, they'll measure part A separately, put it in sort of their bowl, and then measure part B and put that in the bowl. But I feel that way you end up missing bits. So there's still little bits of part A in the measuring bowl. And when you put in part B, it isn't always accurate. So I like to put them in the same measuring cup at the same time. So I always like to keep my bottles really clean as well. I am so pedantic about keeping them clean. I will keep the outer wrappers on the bottles as well, and I'll wipe them before and after every single use. Every single part of that bottle lid will get wiped. There's nothing worse if you've ever worked in a school or gone to open a bottle of PVA glue and it is stuck. And teachers, TAs, and anyone who works in an art club will know the pain. So you have to mix it really, really, really slowly. Okay, if you mix it really quick, you get loads of air bubbles. So you want it to be really slow. I like to put a little bit of resin in my mold and sort of swirl it around a little bit, especially if I'm putting in heavy things. So I've got some safety pins here. Now I sold a safety pin skull at a market and someone else asked me if I was going to be making any more. If you are going to be using things like pins and needles, make sure that you don't stab yourself. If you've ever done that while sewing your jeans, you'll know how painful it can be. So being really unprepared, I did not sort of get my safety pins ready by undoing them and linking them together like I should have. So it did take a really long time and I'm very sorry. So the resin, you can see it's really clear and you can't see any bubbles in it. When I was stirring it, there was no swirls left and it was really, really nice and smooth. And there's no bubbles when I'm pouring it. So I like to put a little bit of resin in the mould, let that settle a little, like I said, swirl it round, and then I put another little layer in, swirl it round again, and that's when I start adding things. Now, when you add things to resin, you could have beautiful resin and there's no bubbles, and the second you put something in it, it's going to create bubbles. That is because no matter how small an item you are putting in, you're actually pushing air in. This is why when it comes to my skulls, I don't expect there to be no bubbles. If there are no bubbles, that's amazing and wonderful, but I don't set out to create a skull with absolutely no bubbles because I will always put something in there and it will move and that will cause a bubble. So if you've worked with resin before, or you haven't worked with resin before, you can put something in it and it's placed perfectly. You leave it and you come back to it. Whatever you've put inside has moved, and that movement has created a bubble. The best way to get rid of bubbles if they're on the surface or if they're not very deep is with a long-handled lighter. Just skim it over the surface. That will bring the bubbles to the top and pop them. Really satisfying to watch. But with this sort of skull, you can see I'm using my paintbrush. I'm just moving the safety pins, swirling them around in the resin to get them where I want them. Things will never stay where you want them. Never. If they do, you are blessed, you are very lucky. If you say things never ever move, then I actually think you're telling a little bit of a fib. So the safety pins do tend to sink slowly, but I actually just wanted to get on, put them in. You will notice that when I show you the skull later, you'll see needles in there as well. So those were sewing needles. So they were from a craft shop, and you can see them in the top here. So poured a load in, and I'm opening up my little heat box that I made the other day. So I've been using little clamps to keep it shut. There is a small slit where the edges don't meet for a little bit of ventilation. And you can see in there, it was really, really, really hot. It's really dark in there as well. I was going to put a light in, but I just didn't think it would stay up. So I hadn't filled the mould to the top at this point because I knew I was going to be moving it. And that is my tip. If you're going to have to move your mould with some resin in, do not fill it to the top until it is in place and you are happy with where it is. And there we are, wiping my hands down because resin gets everywhere. Honestly, it is, again, it's like glitter. You think you haven't got it somewhere and you have. So I just close up the box and I use the clamps, keep the corners together. And actually it just, because of the bubble wrap, it circulates the heat really, really nicely. And things tend to cure quite quick in heat. There's not much else to say really. The warmer it is, the better it is. So because you can't close it all the way to the top, what I do is I use the top section of those clips to hold the top flap of the box in place. And then I actually have a puppy pad that I roll over down the top, and that's pretty much the same sort of principle. So it's plastic on one side and it's a different material on the other. And I'm using some little bits of wood that you can see they've been burnt. So that was me playing around with a blowtorch. So I'm just using that to hold in place and also as a sort of do not disturb. So normally I'd leave my skulls about 24 to 36 hours, but actually this was about 7-8 hours later. I went to have a look because I'd left my thermostat on at 10. It was very, very warm, so I did have to turn it down because as soon as I put my hand in there, it felt like I stuck my hand in a tropical climate. So as you can see, I did quite a bit more. And yeah, so when I touched the mould, it was solid, which is why I've brought it out, and it was really hot. So that mould was hot to touch, and you can kind of see right here there's a line sort of in the middle. Nothing fell in there, so nothing apart from the pins and the needles went in there. It was solid, but because not much time had passed, I was gonna turn the thermostat down, leave it overnight. So I turned it right down to, I think it was number 2. And then in the morning, bright and early, I had another little look. So I picked up the mould and it was solid. There was no squishiness anywhere. And I thought, right, that's going to be done now. So I knew it wouldn't be that hot in there because it was boiling the night before. So opening it up. Now, sometimes things take longer than you expect, and sometimes they take less time than you'd expect as well. It all depends on the resin you've used, what you've put in with the resin, if you've put in things like additions, so that would be like your pins and your needles or even flowers. So I had messed around with some alcohol inks as well, just to see what they were like. I'd never used them before. So it was really smooth on the top. It was definitely solid. It wasn't sticky at all. So this other one came out. That one was with screws and Allen keys and nails. And all sorts of things found from the shed floor. Shh, don't tell the person who owns the shed. So I had a little go with some leftover resin in some different molds as well. I try not to make sure that there's too much resin left over, because I don't want to, that one was still a bit squidgy, so I'd put him back in. I don't like to have too much resin left over. If it fits into one mould, that's nice. If it doesn't fit into one mould and I have to go into another, then I just panic that I'm running out of space. So I tried some little jewellery moulds. Deep pour should not be put into jewellery moulds, but it was left over. Didn't want to see those little bits go to waste. One of them went quite solid. The other one was quite bendy, so that went back in. And just double check that the temperature was down at number 1. So I always turn it off, turn it on. I don't know if anyone else does that. It is a habit of mine. Just like the light switches in the house, they've all got to match up evenly, even if it means having a bit of a disco in the house to get them all to do it. So just closing up the box. And yeah, so you can see the little mark on the puppy pad. You can see the white coming through. That's because a little bit of resin got on that, and I pulled a piece of paper away. And I was like, it's not coming off, it's not coming off. So I yanked it and it ripped. So yeah, resin gets everywhere no matter how careful you are, which is why I'm always trying really hard to keep my gloves nice and clear and keep my work surfaces clean and wiped down, and always got the wipes to hand, as you can see. So we're going to unroll this one, tiny bit of resin left over there. And so definitely squidge free, definitely nice and solid. So time for him to come out. Now I kind of try to get a corner and peel it down. But on these there isn't always a corner. So sometimes you might have a completely round mould and it's like, well, where do I begin? So it's wherever you can get a good grip and you can get good leverage to bring the rest of the mould down so you can get your creation out. Sometimes I actually have to ask for help because it can be too tough to get out. You can get these sprays that you can spray to release the mould from what's inside. I have used one once, but I found it made everything really greasy and I didn't like it. And it took a really long time for everything to feel clean again, like it wasn't greasy and didn't have this film over it. So it pops out really nicely. And there you can see my bubbles, but you can still see that really strange sort of line that's going down the middle. There was nothing in there. So no plastic fell in. It was literally just the safety pins and just the needles and me moving it. So you can see the air bubbles where I've given it a bit of a mix and I've poked things with my paintbrush. But that line is a complete mystery. And actually, I think it kind of adds quite a cool effect. It will puzzle me for a really long time, but I quite like it. So here he is. I'm quite proud of him. These molds make me laugh because look how silly they are inside out with their sort of pokey out eyes and their nose, and they come out really clean as well. Actually, if you can just turn your mold inside out to get your resin out when it has cured and set, it just makes your mold upkeep a lot easier. Sometimes I've had skulls that actually haven't set in the middle and it's oozed and I've had a really sort of mucky jelly like slime left in the bottom of my mold. So when it comes out nicely, it does make it easier. So this one was made with alcohol inks. I used a bronze, a red and a gold. I just really liked the way that the ink just kind of sizzled and bubbled and moved, and how no matter how much of the red that I put on the top, if you put a tiny drop of gold in, the gold just overtook. It just seemed to be a much stronger pigment than the red, and it was so interesting to watch. So this one was a little bit more difficult to get out. I don't know why, but you never get two molds that will pop off the same. It's like fingerprints. There's no two that are identical. So I really like this, actually. It kind of reminds me a bit of a bowling ball. When you were a kid, I was a kid, we used to go bowling, but then someone said, hey, it looks like Red Skull from Marvel. So bubbles in the bottom again. That's because I did poke my paintbrush around in it just to see if I could mix up that alcohol ink at all. There are bubbles in the eyes, and actually I think that gives it a little bit more of a character. But yeah, it does make me laugh the way that they are when they're inside out. But I actually really enjoyed working with the alcohol ink, and it's definitely something that I want to do again.